You wake up, but it doesn't feel like your life. The world moves, yet you move through it like a ghost wearing your own skin. Something inside you whispers, not loud, not cruel, just quiet enough to hurt. Is this truly you? You've done everything right, and still, something ancient inside you refuses to be quiet. The light you once chased no longer warms you. The dreams you built no longer fit. What if this ache isn't a flaw, but a signal? What if your pain isn't punishment, but initiation? Because somewhere beneath the noise, your forgotten self is still waiting. And in this video, you'll remember how to find it. The silence that calls you by your true name. You've done everything right, and still something inside feels wrong. You wake up, but it doesn't feel like your life. The world moves, the hours pass, yet you move through them like a ghost wearing your own skin. There's a hum beneath everything, faint, familiar, like an old song you used to know but can't quite remember the words to. And somewhere in that silence, a voice whispers. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand. It simply asks, is this truly you? You feel it in the still moments, between messages, between achievements, between breaths. That weight you've called fatigue, that dull ache you've labeled depression. It isn't failure, it's memory. A remembrance that once, before you learned to perform, before you traded truth for belonging, you were whole. But the world taught you otherwise. It told you to sit quietly in your cage and call it maturity, to dim the fire in your chest and call it responsibility, to silence your emotions and name it strength. And so you did, until you forgot the sound of your own soul. What you call depression is not a malfunction. It is yourself, that ancient, unbroken core, banging softly on the walls of a life too small to contain it. It's the part of you that refuses to die in a world built on numbness. The lie was elegant. It said, you are sick, you are broken, you are the problem. But the truth was simpler. You were never broken. You were just trained to live disconnected from what is alive within you. Look closer. Every belief that told you you're not enough, every script that said, this is just who you are, none of it was written by you. It was installed by repetition, by fear, by survival. The moment you see this, something cracks. A single ray of light cuts through the fog, and for the first time, you glimpse what's behind the pain, not emptiness, but space. The sacred space where your forgotten self still waits, patient as dawn. That's the moment the healing begins. Not when you fix yourself, but when you stop trying to be the version the world demanded. Because the wound you carry isn't proof of weakness. It's the doorway, the threshold between the false life you were programmed to play and the true one waiting beneath the ashes. You are not the mask. You are the breath beneath it. You are the silent witness who's been watching all along. So tonight, when the noise fades and you can hear the quiet again, listen, the ache you feel isn't an ending. It's an invitation. A door creaks open. The shadow doesn't come to harm you. It comes to hand you a key. Will you take it? Where on this inner path do you find yourself now? The loop and the mirror. You begin to notice it, the rhythm of your own mind repeating. The same thoughts, the same voices, circling like crows over an old field. I'm not enough. I'll never change. Something's wrong with me. But these aren't truths. They're echoes. Recordings from a time when you had no choice but to believe what others said about you. The world needed you small, so it taught you to shrink. It needed you obedient, so it praised your silence. It called your intuition irrational, your sadness weak, your dreams unrealistic. And you learn to play the part, until the play became your personality. You think these loops are random, but they are rituals, unconscious devotions to an identity that was never yours. They begin with belief, solidify as thought, translate into emotion, and finally carve themselves into the body. Shoulders sink, breath tightens, chest collapses, and your body, loyal as ever, whispers back to the brain, "Yes, this is real." That is how the spell sustains itself. But then, something shifts. One day, a breath lands differently. You catch yourself mid-thought and whisper, "Wait, this isn't me." And the silence that follows feels electric. For the first time, you interrupt the loop. You speak aloud, not affirmations, not hope, commands. Ancient words of reclamation. This is not truth. This is code. Each time you say it, something rearranges. Neural pathways loosen. The body exhales. The mirror cracks, and what stares back isn't your reflection, but your observer. The one who watches, timeless and unbound. This is how you begin to reprogram the subconscious, not through effort, but awareness. Not by fighting the darkness, but by naming it, gently, as something learned. The mirror no longer accuses you, it invites you. It asks, who would you be without the script? And as you answer, trembling, honest, afraid, your nervous system begins to listen. Because the body doesn't speak in words, it speaks in energy, tone, rhythm. It can tell when you mean it. So you start small, one breath at a time, one phrase at a time. This thought is not me. This emotion is not my enemy. This identity is not permanent. And soon, the loop that once ruled you becomes the teacher. Every spiral becomes an initiation, a reminder that the mind is programmable, and that you, at your core, are the programmer. You were never stuck. You were simply hypnotized. And the moment you realize this, the mirror turns clear again, revealing not a reflection, but a portal. A map back to yourself. What part of your shadow is quietly asking to be seen? Descent the sacred night of the soul. There comes a moment when the surface shatters, when even your affirmations taste hollow, and every fix feels like noise. The light you once chased no longer soothes you, because you've outgrown the version of yourself that needed it. This is where descent begins, not as punishment, but as invitation. You call it depression, collapse, burnout. Ancient cultures called it initiation. The moment the false self dies, so something truer can live. You start to notice. The world you built no longer fits. The conversations feel paper thin. The ambitions that once drove you feel foreign. Your spirit grows heavy with truths you haven't yet named. And so you fall into the silence, into yourself. It's dark here, yes, but it's a sacred darkness. The kind that strips away illusion. The kind that demands honesty. In myth, this is the underworld, the descent of Inanna, of Orpheus, of every soul who dares to remember. Jung called it the nigredo, the blackening, when all that is false must dissolve before the gold appears. You begin to see your emotions not as flaws, but as guides. Anxiety whispers, "This environment is lying to me." Numbness says, "This path isn't mine." Fatigue murmurs, "This identity is no longer sustainable." They are not symptoms, they are signals. Your shadow, once feared, becomes the keeper of meaning. It shows you everything you buried, rage you called unholy, grief you labeled weakness, desire you repressed to be accepted. And when you finally turn toward them, trembling, they soften. Because shadows only stay dark when you refuse to face them. You realize that your breakdown was never the end. It was the beginning, a shedding, a burning away of every borrowed mask. Here, in this deep night, the soul begins its alchemy. Pain becomes teacher, fear becomes threshold, grief becomes purification. And when the silence grows almost unbearable, something ancient stirs inside you, a quiet knowing that whispers, "You are not broken. You are being remade." So you stop running. You sit in the dark and breathe. And for the first time, you don't try to escape the fire. You let it forge you. Because transformation doesn't happen in light. It happens in heat. And when the embers fade and you rise again, smaller in ego, larger in soul, you'll know that descent was never your downfall. It was your initiation. Which truth in this darkness feels most like a guide to you now? Remembering the self-identity as frequency. There comes a day when you no longer beg for clarity, you breathe it. When you stop chasing healing like a finish line, and instead begin remembering what wholeness feels like. You start to sense that reality is not fixed, it's responsive. That your life has been echoing the frequency of your inner state all along. What you once called luck or fate was simply resonance, mirroring the signal you've been broadcasting. And suddenly, it makes sense. You weren't cursed. You were tuned to an old station, one built on survival, shame, scarcity. But now, you're learning how to change the channel. Close your eyes. Breathe. Ask quietly, who am I when I stop repeating what was done to me? And in that stillness, a new vibration begins to hum beneath your skin. It's subtle, like light filtering through fog. It's the real you, the unprogrammed essence beneath the noise. You don't need to visualize perfection. You need to feel alignment. You don't become your highest self someday. You remember them now, in your breath, in your tone, in the way you stand when no one is watching. This is the language of the self, not words, but state. In Jung's language, this is individuation, when your fragments, shadow and light, anima and animus, stop competing and begin to dance. You no longer reject the parts of you that once scared you. You integrate them. You let the dark hold hands with the divine. That is what wholeness feels like, not purity, but harmony. The world responds differently when you broadcast from truth. People sense it. Opportunities flow where fear once lived. Synchronicities bloom like morning dew, because the outer field always bends to the frequency of the inner one. This is not manifestation. This is resonance, a remembering that your consciousness is the command line of reality itself. You don't need to chase the timeline you desire. You simply need to stop subscribing to the old one. So when the familiar doubt returns, you're not ready. You're still broken. Smile softly and whisper, "That thought belongs to an outdated version of me," and watch the air around you change. Because in that moment, you've shifted universes. Where in your body can you feel the frequency of your true self beginning to awaken? Installing the soul operating system. You've glimpsed the light beneath the ashes. But remembering who you are is only the beginning. To stay awake, you must anchor the new signal, not as belief, but as rhythm. Because the mind forgets, the nervous system doesn't. You don't rise by accident. You rise by ritual. Not the kind that demands perfection, but the quiet, daily gestures that whisper to your soul, "I'm still here." When dawn breaks, Before the world reaches for you, pause. Don't scroll, don't speak. Let your first breath be sacred. Inhale deeply, hold. And as you exhale, say softly, "This body wakes for purpose, not memory." That single phrase reclaims your system. It tells your cells that today is not a repetition of yesterday. It's a new creation. Then, gratitude, not for the cliche of positive thinking, but as grounding. Gratitude reroutes you into the present moment, where the real power lives. Feel your feet on the floor. Feel the air move through you. Whisper, "I am home in this breath." At midday, when the noise of the world begins to pull, create a small interruption, a pulse of remembrance. One hand on the chest, one breath inward, a quiet question. Am I acting from fear or from frequency? Fear contracts the field. Frequency expands it. Notice your posture, your tone, the way your energy shifts the room. You don't need to control it. Just observe. Presence is the correction. And when night falls, before sleep claims you, plant new code into the subconscious soil. Ask, what part of me did I honor today? What pattern did I interrupt? Who am I becoming? As you drift into theta, the brain's dream state gateway, imagine yourself already aligned with that version. Feel it in your bones, not as fantasy, but as fact. Because the subconscious doesn't understand time, it understands feeling. This is how you stabilize the awakening. Through repetition that feels like reverence. Through daily devotion to inner coherence. You are not forcing change, you are formatting your field. Every breath, every whisper, every choice becomes sacred technology. You are rebuilding the bridge between your soul and your body, your mind and your energy, your past and your potential. No longer surviving the day, but sovereigning it. Because healing isn't something you do, it's something you live, one breath, one frequency, one act of remembering at a time. Which of these small rituals calls most deeply to your soul right now? Coronation of the inner sovereign. There comes a quiet morning when you realize you're not chasing healing anymore. You're living it. The loop that once trapped you now feels distant, like an echo fading across water. You've stepped out of survival and into authorship, and the world, impossibly, seems to recognize you. But before you rise fully, you pause. You turn back toward the versions of you who carried the weight, who walked through fire without a map. The anxious one, the numb one, the one who whispered just one more day. You bow to them, not as failures, but as bridges, because they were never your burdens, they were your guardians. Every shadow you met was a teacher in disguise, every silence a temple, every collapse a doorway. You see it now. You were never broken, only buried. The gold was inside you the entire time, waiting for enough stillness to shine. And as you breathe, you feel the axis of your being shift. The crown you once sought from the world settles quietly inside your chest. It's not about control, not about triumph. It's about presence, a sovereignty that doesn't need to shout, because it simply is. This is the final stage of remembering, not perfection, but power rooted in peace. You move through the day like a tuning fork, radiating coherence. You don't need to seek worth anymore, you embody it. You don't need to demand love, you transmit it. You don't plead with life to give you meaning, you breathe, and meaning unfolds. Because the self, the one beyond all roles and fears, is now online, fully awake, fully integrated. You are not reacting to reality, you are composing it. You are the architect of frequency, the poet of your own vibration. So when doubt returns, and it will, softly, as memory, smile. Let it pass through like wine through open hands. You don't need to fight the storm anymore. You are the weather. And before you move on, whisper one last blessing. The old me was sacred, but complete. The new me is not born from effort, but remembrance. This is not a new beginning. It is the continuation of eternity through you. Walk gently now. Speak slowly. Move as if the universe listens to your every step, because it does. You have remembered your name. And the name was always wholeness. Where on this path of remembrance do you stand now? The threshold, the middle, or the homecoming?